The night my grandfather's home burned down, I swear the flames didn't just consume wood and brick, they devoured a piece of me. It was past midnight when the knock came, frantic and desperate, rattling the glass on the front door. My neighbor stood there, face pale in the glow of distant orange. "It's the old house," he gasped. "It's on fire." I ran barefoot down the street, lungs tearing as smoke clawed at my throat. The house, our house, the place my grandfather had built with his hands after coming home from the war, was a furnace. Flames roared through the roof, sparks leapt into the night sky, and every memory I had of holidays, stories by the fireplace, the smell of cedar, was being reduced to ash before my eyes. And in the chaos, over the roar of sirens and neighbors' horrified cries, one sound pierced through with surgical cruelty: laughter. I turned, and there she was, Karen. Her bulk swayed under the harsh light, her face slick with sweat, but her grin stretched wide, grotesque. "Maybe now you'll learn to follow the rules," she shouted, her voice shrill enough to cut through the night. "Your grandfather's shack was an eyesore, a hazard, and I did what the HOA should have done years ago." I froze, disbelief battling with fury. She wasn't hiding it. She was boasting. While firefighters struggled to contain the inferno, while I watched generations of history collapse in smoke, she was claiming credit for it. My fists clenched until blood trickled from my palms. The urge to charge at her nearly broke me, but the sight of my father gripping my shoulder held me back. "Don't," he whispered hoarsely. "Let the law handle her." But it wasn't just the law that would handle her. It was fate. In the days that followed, investigators confirmed what Karen had blurted out in arrogance. The fire had been set intentionally. Residue of accelerant traced back to cans found in her garage. A neighbor's doorbell camera caught her SUV idling near the property minutes before the blaze. She had been sloppy, drunk on power, convinced she was untouchable. And when the police led her out in cuffs, screaming at the cameras about neighborhood standards and her authority, the whole community watched. For the first time, they saw her not as the ruler of the HOA but as a criminal stripped bare. But the real twist, the poetic strike of destiny, came weeks later at her arraignment. The courtroom was buzzing, packed with neighbors, reporters, and victims of her reign. I sat with my family, grief still raw, the smell of charred wood lingering in my clothes no matter how often I washed them. The bailiff called the session to order. Karen strutted in, even in shackles, still trying to look regal, her sneer fixed on me like a dagger. Then the judge entered, and the room fell silent. It was my grandfather, not the man in overalls who once mended fences with calloused hands, not the storyteller by the fire, but the Honorable Judge Henry Callahan, robe flowing, gavel in hand, eyes burning with the fire Karen herself had lit. My grandfather had retired years earlier, but at the request of the county, he had returned to preside over special cases. No one had told me it would be this one. When Karen saw him, her face drained of color. She stammered, You can't be serious. He's biased. She's family." But the clerk shook his head. "The Honorable Judge Callahan is here by state appointment. His reputation for impartiality speaks for itself." My grandfather's gaze never wavered. "Mrs. Green," he said evenly, "you stand accused of arson, property destruction, fraud, and reckless endangerment. This court does not recognize your supposed authority in place of the law." His voice was calm, but I knew that voice. I had heard it discipline grown men who thought themselves above consequence. And Karen crumbled beneath it. She tried everything. She wailed about how the house violated HOA rules, how she was protecting property values, how the whole neighborhood supported her. But witnesses testified one after another, each dismantling her lies. Neighbors spoke of her threats, her fines, her vendettas. The fire inspector detailed the accelerant. The police displayed the footage of her SUV. And when they rolled in the charred remains of the very gas can pulled from her garage, the jury visibly recoiled. At one point, in a desperate twist, Karen's own daughter was called to testify. A timid woman who had lived under her mother's shadow, she stood trembling as she admitted. She bragged to me. She said burning it down would scare everyone else into obedience. I begged her not to do it, but she wouldn't listen. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "She's not protecting the community. She's destroying it." That was the breaking point. The mask was gone. The tyrant was exposed as nothing more than a bully with matches. And my grandfather, though I could see the grief in his eyes, delivered the verdict without hesitation. Guilty, on every count. This court sentences you to 20 years in prison and restitution to the Callahan family for the destruction of their home. Let it be known that no one, not even those who claim to rule a community, are above the law. His gavel struck, and in that moment it wasn't just justice. It was vindication. Karen screamed as deputies dragged her away, thrashing, spitting venom, threatening lawsuits that would never come. But the neighborhood didn't hear her threats. They heard the sound of the gavel, the echo of truth crashing through years of lies. For me, the house was gone, ashes and rubble. But something greater had been rebuilt that day: trust. Neighbors who had once cowered now stood tall. People brought food, offered to help rebuild, planted flowers on the scarred lot. My son and I placed a wooden sign in the soil, simple words carved by hand: "This land endures." That night, my grandfather joined us at the empty lot. He stood silently for a long time, his robe traded again for his old coat. Finally he said, "They can burn a house, but they can't burn legacy. They can't burn truth." His hand gripped my shoulder, steady as ever. And in the glow of the moonlight, I understood what he meant. Karen had destroyed wood and stone, but she had forged something stronger without meaning to: a community unbroken. The trial may have ended with the echo of my grandfather's gavel, but the ripple of Karen's downfall reached far beyond that single courtroom. In the weeks that followed, our neighborhood transformed in ways I could never have imagined. It was as though her arrest had broken a spell. People who once whispered behind curtains now spoke loudly, freely, sometimes angrily, sometimes with laughter that had been buried too long. The air felt lighter, as though the smoke that had hung in our lungs from the fire had lifted from our lives too. Yet the scars of that night remained. Walking past the blackened lot where my grandfather's home had stood was like reopening a wound every day. Neighbors left flowers and candles along the edge, children drew chalk hearts on the pavement, and strangers from across the county drove by to pay their respects. They didn't just see a burned house, they saw a symbol of arrogance punished and a community finally free. Karen's name spread across headlines. HOA president convicted of arson became a national story. Talk show hosts mocked her arrogance. Social media turned her mugshot into a meme. And across the country people told their own stories of HOA Karens who bullied and threatened. My grandfather's case became a rallying cry, proof that power built on intimidation eventually crumbles. But behind the public spectacle, something far more personal unfolded. My grandfather, though outwardly calm, carried grief in his eyes. One evening, a week after the sentencing, I found him standing on the charred remains of his porch, the moon casting shadows across the ashes. He held a piece of wood in his hands, blackened at the edges, still faintly smelling of cedar. "This beam," he murmured. "I cut it with my father in 1953. We built this place so we'd always have somewhere to return. She thought burning it would erase us." He let the piece fall back into the rubble, his shoulders straightening. "But you can't erase what's in here," he said, tapping his chest. It was then he made a decision that surprised us all. Instead of rebuilding the house exactly as it had been, he proposed turning the land into something greater. "A place of remembrance," he explained to the community at a gathering. "Not just for me, not just for my family, but for everyone who's been bullied, silenced, or threatened by false authority. Let this land stand as proof that truth outlasts tyranny." The idea caught fire, not the destructive kind Karen lit, but the kind that warms and unites. Donations poured in, volunteers lined up, and slowly the lot began to change. What had been ash became soil, what had been ruin became foundation. But before that could fully take shape, Karen wasn't done making noise. From prison, she tried filing appeals, scrawled letters filled with venom and denial. "This is corruption. The judge was biased. I was protecting the neighborhood," she wrote. Each letter was more desperate, her handwriting shaking, her arguments hollow. The courts dismissed every appeal, but her tantrums gave the news more fuel. And each time she screamed, her voice carried less power, reduced to background noise against the louder sound of unity building in her absence. The final twist came months later, when one of Karen's closest allies on the HOA board, a man named Victor, was subpoenaed in a related investigation. Many had suspected him of helping her funnel funds, and now under oath he admitted it. "She threatened me," he confessed, voice shaking in front of the grand jury. "Said if I didn't sign the checks, she'd destroy me like she destroyed others. I thought she was unstoppable." His testimony sealed the dismantling of the entire HOA. The state dissolved it completely, appointing a temporary trustee to oversee what remained of community funds. The homeowners, finally free, voted to never form another board. That day, standing at the ballot count, I felt something indescribable: freedom not just for me, but for everyone. No more fines over lawn height. No more threats about garden gnomes or children's bikes. No more one-woman tyranny disguised as community order. We had reclaimed our lives. The memorial garden on my grandfather's lot became the heart of it. We planted cedar trees, lavender, and a circle of roses in the center. At its heart, we raised a wooden sign carved with his words: "They can burn wood, but not legacy." On weekends, families gathered there to talk, to laugh, to heal. Veterans told stories under the trees, children played tag through the rows of flowers, and sometimes I'd catch my grandfather sitting quietly on the bench, his eyes misty but his lips curved in peace. The most powerful moment came the day we unveiled the plaque, cast in bronze, bearing not just my grandfather's name but the names of every neighbor Karen had wronged. One by one, people touched the plaque, as though reclaiming pieces of themselves. My son, who had cried that night watching the fire, ran his fingers across it and said softly, "We beat her, didn't we?" And I answered, "Yes, because we stood together." Karen, rotting in prison, faded from relevance. No one visited her. No one wrote her letters. Even her daughter, who had bravely testified, changed her last name and started over far away. The woman who once ruled with fear now had nothing but four walls and the echoes of her own arrogance. And us? We rebuilt not just homes and gardens, but trust. Our neighborhood became a story people across the country pointed to when asked if justice can really be done. The answer was yes. Looking back now, I realized the fire didn't just destroy. It revealed. It burned away the lies, the fear, and the false power Karen wielded, leaving behind something purer, stronger, more lasting. My grandfather's land may not hold the same house anymore, but it holds something greater. A promise that bullies fall, that truth stands, and that legacy is more than Walsett's people. So here's my question to you, the one I still turn over in my mind at night. Was 20 years behind bars enough for what Karen did for the fire, the theft, the years of tormentor? Should justice have cut even deeper? Was her downfall fitting, or did she escape too lightly? Share your thoughts, because stories like this remind us. Justice isn't just in the courtroom, it's in how we choose to remember, rebuild, and rise.